Okay, so we're still talking about law. Let's talk about jurisprudence. And probably most of you are saying, well, what the heck does that mean? Well, let's look at some of these different areas of law. And as we're looking at this, think to yourself, golly gee, I've heard of this before. Why? Because you put it all together, you might actually figure out how it works. And that's sort of a broad sense, but listen to some of these. Natural law. Law contains universal moral principles. And the way I like to explain this is, you remember that stuff your mama told you when you were a little kid? You know, don't do this. Don't hit young ladies. Don't spit in other people's food. Don't throw mud pies. You know, don't cross the street without walking both ways. Folks, that's universal. All right, we were all told the same thing by mama. Okay, and if you ever take an ethics class from me, that's going to be something I strive to try to tell you. If you want to do what's right and proper, do what your mama told you when you were growing up. Okay. Now, positive law. Law is the command of the state backed by force and punishments. Certainly. Folks, we have laws set in place. We have laws in the great state of Tennessee that tell us to do A, B, C, and D. If you don't do A, B, C, or D, then guess what? There are consequences. Okay? So, if you speed on the interstate and the state patrol sees you and they get you on the radar gun, can they stop you? Yes. Probable cause. Can they arrest you? They probably won't arrest you. They'll take your license. Alright, you got to show up to court and face your punishment. Okay? If you murder somebody, and they catch you, can they imprison you? Yes. Can they do a show of force? Absolutely. Alright? Positive law. Again, this stuff should sound familiar to you. Historical school. Law should focus on legal principles that have withstood the test of time in a nation. Folks, this is a good thing. Murder is murder is murder is murder. Alright? Breach of contract is breach of contract is breach of contract. However, laws do evolve over time. Keep that in mind. I mean, was the internet around, 30 years ago? Certainly not the way it is now. We need to have laws that establish how things are done with the internet. Sure. But they're going to be based on historical laws that are already in place. That's why they say the Constitution of the U.S. is the best document ever. It's a living document. It evolves over time through interpretation and common law, judge-made law, etc. Sociological jurisprudence. Law can and should change to meet new developments, and that's what I'm talking about. As society changes, so does the law. But when you look at old laws, they are precedent, and because of the doctrine of stare decisis, judges don't want to overturn it. However, as society changes, the laws will change with them. Legal realism goes beyond the words of law to examine what police, administrators, prosecutors, and judges are actually doing as they enforce, interpret, and apply laws. Folks, that's why we have defense lawyers, alright? Is to keep the other side in check. Now, some of you may think, well, golly gee, Childs is an evil defense lawyer. No, I'm not an evil defense lawyer. I'm just trying to represent the best interests of my client, whether or not it's the evil Whiplash or the good guy He-Man. Okay? I'm going to defend them both the same. Why? Because they both have rights. They are both entitled to my representation if they can afford it. Okay? Common law and civil law. Common law emphasizes the role of judges in determining the meaning of laws, and this common law has existed since the days of early English law. And basically what you're looking at is judge-made law. If you went before the king in England and you had a dispute, the king would make his ruling and that would be the end of it. Well, guess what? Over the course of the king making more and more decisions, that created a area of law, common law. What was right, what was wrong. Before that, it was lords and serfs and everything else. But through time, as the king made laws or made decisions, it developed into common law. Why? Because if the good king made a ruling between Whiplash and Leonardo, and then a few years later, He-Man came along against the evil Blackberry to try to make a decision on what to do. It was very similar to what happened with Whiplash and Leonardo. Then he could have precedent, meaning what happened before, and say, hey, since I ruled this way with Whiplash and Leonardo, I'm now going to rule this way with He-Man and the evil Blackberry. Okay? That's precedent. And because of the doctrine of stare decisis, the judge doesn't want to overturn his prior ruling unless there's a darn good reason. Now, civil law relies more on legislation than judicial decisions for law. Civil law courts do not make law, nor do their judges think themselves obligated to follow prior judicial decisions. And you'll see this in certain jurisdictions. I believe Louisiana is a civil law state. Don't quote me on that, but I think they are. And again, it's a little bit different than common law, because they're not necessarily making judicial decisions, okay, but they are following the law. Now, public and private law. Public law includes matters that involve the regulation of society, constitutional law. One of my favorite areas, by the way. It's always fun to discuss and debate constitutional law. If any of you go to law school or have an opportunity to take constitutional law, it is a lot of fun. Administrative law has been called the fourth branch of government. You have judicial, legislative, and executive, but they say administrative law is the fourth branch, and that's just a joke. But criminal law, that regulates society. Murder, rape, speeding, drugs, all that good stuff. That's criminal law because we are trying to regulate society. Now, private law, which is probably what most of you will be more interested in, deals with property law, contract law, tort law, and tort's basically just a wrongdoing. You have your battery, negligence, products liability, that sort of thing. Now you have civil law and criminal law. Now, when I'm talking about civil law versus criminal law, the best way to understand it is if you have a civil dispute with somebody, if you want to sue them, then you have a civil matter. Personal injury. You get hit in a car wreck, then that's a civil matter because you're going to sue that individual. If someone hits you, okay, bam, that's battery. If you want to sue them for the injuries you sustained from getting hit, that's civil. But if the state comes in and wants to sue them criminally, then the state's coming in and going after you for criminal battery. Okay? So civil is person versus person. Criminal is state versus person. Substantive law versus procedural law. And this is very easy. Substantive law. The part of the law creating, defining, and regulating rights, duties, and powers. The what? What happened? What are we regulating? Whereas procedurally is the part of the law telling the methods or the means for having the rights or the duties enforced, meaning the how. So you'll have criminal and civil procedure, meaning how do you proceed in a criminal matter and a civil matter. But you'll also have the substantive law being contracts, torts, family law, whatever. Those are all going to be what is the actual substance of the law. Now, where does the law come from? Well, it comes from all sorts of places. We have constitutions. We have the U.S. Constitution. It sets up our system of government, but also like the Bill of Rights gives us individual freedoms. And then we have state constitutions. The great state of Tennessee, it has a constitution. The great state of Georgia has a constitution. And that helps us, what are the laws. Now, legislation. Certainly the legislative of the state, or even the feds, can get together and write laws, all right? Statutes, all right? Codes, all right? Administrative regulations, all right? When I talk about administrative law, the one that I deal with the most is the Department of Driver Services. That's an administrative function. They regulate driver's license, all right? So if someone gets a DUI, I have to go to the Department of Driver Services or the DOT, whatever it is in Tennessee. But in Georgia, it is the Department of Driver Services, and go to hearings to try to get your license back, that sort of thing. Judicial decisions and case law. Folks, anytime I'm doing something, I always go and read old cases. Why? Because that is precedent. It's what has been decided in the past. I can use that to say, hey, judge, my guy is innocent, or my guy should win this claim. Okay? I like this hierarchy. When we talk about things, there are different levels of hierarchy. Who trumps who? And this is a pretty darn good list here. U.S. Constitution, federal legislation, federal administrative regulation. So you see the federal stuff usually trumps. But then you get to the state level, the state constitutions, legislation, administrative regulation. You'll have state laws. Then you'll have federal laws, state laws. and then you'll have local ordinances, you know, don't speed in this area, or don't smoke within so many feet of a building, that sort of thing, and then case law. So this hierarchy of laws is out there, and it tells us, you know, who trumps who.